I was packing up my office at the Pentagon when my phone buzzed. It was my family lawyer, Mark Dalton. Mark isn't the kind of guy who calls just to chat. I put him on speaker so I could keep folding my uniforms into the duffel. "Colleen, I'm sorry to tell you this," he said. "Your Aunt Evelyn passed away last week." I stopped what I was doing. Aunt Evelyn was the one relative who actually kept in touch, sent me letters when I was deployed, remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders. "She left you something," Mark continued. "And it's substantial. $80 million, plus the house on the river in Charleston." I had to sit down for that. 80 million? I've seen military budgets smaller than that. I asked him twice to repeat it. He confirmed it both times. It was in a trust under my name, airtight. No one else could touch it without my signature. The first thought that crossed my mind wasn't a yacht or a sports car. It was, how the hell am I going to keep this quiet until I figure things out? Because if certain people in my family heard, especially my sister Natalie, it would turn into a circus. Natalie and I aren't what you'd call close. Growing up, she saw me as the golden child. Good grades, sports scholarships, and eventually the Air Force. She made different choices, quitting college, bouncing between jobs, dating guys who couldn't spell commitment. She's never forgiven me for being the responsible one. I've never forgiven her for making every family gathering a competition I never signed up for. I told Mark to keep it quiet for now. I wanted to fly home, meet him in person, go over everything before anyone else got wind of it. He agreed. I finished packing and stopped by my commanding officer's office to tell him I was taking personal leave. He didn't ask questions. He could read it on my face that it wasn't military business. The next morning, I was at Reagan National before the sun came up. The flight to Charleston was quick, but my mind didn't slow down. I kept going over logistics. I'd have to meet with Mark at his office downtown. I'd need to check the house on the river, see what condition it was in. And I'd have to dodge Natalie like she was a heat-seeking missile. Charleston greeted me with warm air and that mix of salt and marsh you don't smell anywhere else. I picked up a rental car and headed toward my condo in the historic district. It's small but enough for me, and it's in a quiet building where nobody cares about my job or asks too many questions. Perfect for keeping a low profile. I dropped my bags, changed into jeans and a t-shirt, and called Mark. He set our meeting for the following afternoon. That gave me the rest of the day to get groceries and maybe go for a run to shake off the travel. While I was in the checkout line at the market, my phone lit up with Natalie's name. I considered ignoring it, but I answered. "Back in town?" she asked. "No hello?" "For a bit," I said. "You could have told me," she replied. "It was short notice," I said. "I've got some personal stuff to handle." That was all it took for her tone to sharpen. "What kind of personal stuff?" "The kind that's personal," I said, and ended the call before she could dig any deeper. By evening, I was unpacked, my fridge was stocked, and I'd double-checked the locks. Old habit. I sat on the couch with my laptop, looking at my calendar. The meeting with Mark was at 3 o'clock tomorrow. I could swing by the river house in the morning, take a quick look. Aunt Evelyn hadn't lived there in years, but she kept it maintained. I'd only been there twice as a kid. I remembered the wide porch and the dock that went straight into the water. Around 9 p.m., I got a text from a friend at the base. "Heard you're back in Charleston. Beer soon?" I told him maybe next week. My priority was locking down the inheritance before anyone tried to latch onto it. I went to bed early, but my brain wouldn't shut off. The thought of Natalie finding out kept me wired. She's the kind of person who would make it her life's mission to insert herself into my business. Money that size would be like a magnet for her. The next morning was clear and bright. I made coffee, pulled up the address on my phone, and drove toward the river. The neighborhood was quiet, full of old homes with manicured lawns and front porches. Aunt Evelyn's place was at the end of a street that dead-ended into the water. I parked in the driveway and got out. The house looked just like I remembered, maybe even better. Fresh paint, solid shutters, roof in good shape. Whoever she'd hired to look after it had done their job. I walked around the side and saw the dock still standing, with the tide coming in under it. For a moment, I thought about how easy it would be to live here. No more constant moves every time the Air Force needed me somewhere. No more cramped apartments on base. But that thought didn't last. I wasn't ready to give up my career, and I knew this house might just become another target for Natalie. I locked up and headed back to my condo, planning to grab lunch before the meeting with Mark. I never made it that far. I was 2 blocks from home, crossing an intersection I'd driven through 1,000 times. The light turned green. I started forward. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a white delivery truck blow through the red on my left. There was no time to react. The impact was like getting hit by a sledgehammer. My head slammed against the side window, glass shattered, and the world spun. The airbag punched me in the chest, knocking the breath out of me. My ears rang so loud it drowned out everything else. When I could focus again, there were voices outside the car. A man's voice said, "Don't move, ma'am. We're calling for help." I wanted to say I was fine, but my mouth felt full of cotton. My left shoulder was on fire, and I couldn't tell if it was broken or just bruised. The metallic taste in my mouth told me I'd bitten my tongue. Paramedics arrived fast. One of them leaned in and asked my name. I gave it, along with my address. He asked if there was anyone they should call. My mind went straight to someone from my unit, not Natalie. They got me onto a stretcher, secured my neck, and loaded me into the ambulance. I stared at the ceiling panels as they hooked me to an IV. The siren started, and the city blurred past the rear doors. I wasn't thinking about the truck driver or the damage to my car. I was thinking about how, in less than 24 hours, I'd gone from a private plan to handle my aunt's inheritance quietly, to being strapped into the back of an ambulance, heading to a military hospital, with no idea how many people would know where I was before the day was over. The paramedics' questions faded into the background as they wheeled me through the hospital doors. The smell of antiseptic hit me before the bright lights did. They rolled me into an exam room, hooked me up to monitors, and started cutting away my shirt to check for injuries. My shoulder throbbed harder when the cold scissors grazed my skin. A nurse with a no-nonsense tone introduced herself as Denise. She asked me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I told her 9, maybe 9.5, and she gave me something through the IV that dulled it fast. X-rays followed. My collarbone was fractured, 2 ribs cracked, and my head was going to pound for days from the concussion. While the doctor gave orders, my mind drifted. Not to the truck or the hospital bills. It went back years, to the kitchen table where Natalie and I learned early how to push each other's buttons. We were only 2 years apart, but we might as well have been born on different planets. I was the one who brought home perfect report cards and letters from coaches. Natalie could outtalk anyone and had a gift for making friends instantly, but she treated rules like they were optional. Our parents tried to balance it. When I got an award, Natalie got a day out with Mom. When she got in trouble at school, I got pulled into the family talk, so no one felt singled out. But the balance didn't work. Natalie kept a mental scoreboard, and in her mind, I was always ahead. By the time high school rolled around, she was skipping classes, sneaking out, and telling people I was the boring one. I didn't care until she started spreading rumors that got back to my friends. That's when I realized her competitiveness wasn't harmless. When I enlisted in the Air Force at 19, Natalie told me I'd come crawling back in a year. She bet me $100 I wouldn't make it through basic training. I made it, and then some. I never got that 100. Fast forward to now, lying on a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles while the medical team worked. Those old patterns were still there. If she found out I'd inherited millions, she wouldn't think, "Good for Colleen." She'd think, "How do I get my share?" Denise came back with a clipboard. "We're admitting you for observation," she said. "You'll be here at least overnight, maybe a couple of days." I didn't argue. I could barely sit up without the room tilting. She settled me in a room with 2 beds, though the other one was empty. She adjusted the IV and told me to buzz if I needed anything. I reached for my phone. My instinct was to call someone from my unit people who understood the value of keeping things quiet. I texted Chief Master Sergeant Boyd, a mentor and friend, letting him know I was in Charleston Memorial's military wing. He replied fast. "Need me there?" I told him not yet. The door opened, and I tensed. It wasn't Natalie, just a hospital tech checking my vitals. He chatted about the weather, took my blood pressure, and left. The quiet settled in again. My mind wandered back to the last real conversation Natalie and I had, a few years ago at a family barbecue. She'd made some dig about how real jobs don't involve wearing a uniform and living off the government. I'd laughed it off in front of everyone, but later I told her she could keep her opinions to herself. She didn't. A knock broke the memory. Denise poked her head in. "You've got a visitor," she said. not asking if I wanted one. And there was Natalie, walking in, like she owned the place. She had on a sundress and sunglasses pushed up into her hair. The first words out of her mouth weren't, "Are you okay?" But, "I heard you were in a crash." "Yeah," I said. She looked around the room, taking in the empty second bed, the IV stand, the monitor beeping at my side. "You're really milking this, huh?" I ignored that. "How did you hear?" "Charleston's small," she said, like that explained everything. "So, what's going on with you? I thought you were busy saving the world or whatever you do up in DC. "I'm on leave," I said. "Leave for what?" "Personal reasons." Her eyes narrowed. "Personnel like money?" I stared back at her. "Number." She smiled like she didn't believe me. "You know, I've been looking at some investment opportunities lately. Real estate, small businesses. Could be a good time for family to help each other out." The nurse walked in before I had to respond, checking my IV line. Natalie stood there, watching me like she was waiting for me to crack. When she saw she wasn't getting answers, she said she'd be back when I wasn't so grumpy. After she left, Denise shook her head. "Family?" "Unfortunately," I said. I leaned back against the pillows. That visit had been short, but it was enough to remind me that Natalie hadn't changed. If anything, she'd just gotten more practiced at fishing for information without showing her hand. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of vital checks, Tylenol, and short naps. At one point, I woke up to my phone buzzing. A text from Natalie. "Let's get lunch soon. I have some ideas I want to run by you." I didn't answer. By evening, I could sit up without feeling like my head would roll off. A tray of hospital food arrived, dried chicken, limp green beans, a square of something pretending to be cake. I ate what I could and pushed the rest aside. The television in the corner played quietly, some local news segment about a council meeting. I only half listened until I caught Natalie's name. She was in the background of a shot, talking to a man I didn't recognize. The caption didn't say her name, but I knew that profile, that posture. It was probably nothing. Or maybe it was exactly the kind of investment meeting she'd hinted at earlier. I made a mental note to keep my guard up. Night settled over the city, and the hospital wing got quieter. Denise came in one last time before her shift ended, making sure I had everything I needed. I told her I was fine. That was only partly true, but it was easier than explaining the mix of physical pain and mental chess I was playing. I switched off the television and let the room go dark, the monitor's steady beep marking the seconds. Somewhere in the building, a cart squeaked down the hall. My eyes closed, but sleep didn't come right away. Instead, the day replayed in pieces. Mark's call, the house on the river, Natalie's sunglasses pushed into her hair, and the look she gave me when I didn't take the bait. The first thing I registered in the morning was the stiffness in my shoulder and the dull ache in my ribs when I shifted. The hospital room was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning. A new nurse was on duty, a younger guy named Travis. He took my vitals and asked if I wanted breakfast. I told him I wasn't hungry, which wasn't entirely true, but the thought of the soggy eggs they served here didn't help. The doctor came in not long after. He said my scans looked stable, but with a concussion and a fractured clavicle, I wasn't going anywhere yet. 2 days minimum, maybe more if I showed signs of dizziness or nausea. I nodded. I'd been through worse in the field, but hospitals weren't exactly my favorite place to spend time. Mark called mid-morning. He kept his voice low, even though he was in his office miles away. "I heard about the accident. You okay?" "I'm in one piece mostly," I said. "That meeting we planned no rush. We can do it when you're out." "I'd rather not wait too long," I told him. "I want those papers signed while I still control the timing." He understood. We agreed he'd come by the hospital with the documents in a few days if I wasn't discharged yet. I hung up and tried to focus on the mindless daytime television running in the background. That lasted about 10 minutes before my phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "I'm tied up today, but I'll check in later. Let me know if you need anything." It was polite enough, but I knew better. If she brought anything, it wouldn't be flowers, it would be questions. By early afternoon, the meds had me dozing in and out. At one point, I woke to the sound of rain hitting the window. It made me think of Charleston streets flooding in heavy storms, water creeping up the curbs. I was about to drift off again when I heard voices in the hall. A man's laugh, then a woman's reply. The door swung open. It wasn't Natalie. It was Chief Boyd, wearing jeans and a polo instead of his uniform. Heard you were trying to get out of PT the hard way, he said with a smirk. I grinned despite myself. Figured I'd take a vacation the only way the Air Force can't argue with. He sat in the chair by the bed and glanced at the monitors. You look better than the report made it sound. We talked for a while about people back at the base, a few harmless updates about upcoming deployments. He didn't press about why I was really home, and I didn't offer it. Before leaving, he told me to call if I needed someone to run interference with curious relatives. That offer would turn out to be more useful than I realized. After he left, the room felt quieter than before. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy. I shifted to reach for my water, and the movement sent a sharp bolt of pain through my shoulder. I set the cup down carefully, reminded that healing was going to take patience. Around 5, Travis came in to check my vitals again. While he worked, he asked if I'd heard from the police about the accident. I said no. He told me they'd probably want my statement soon. It wasn't until later, lying there with the lights dimmed, that I started replaying the crash in my mind. I remembered the green light, the blur of white on my left, the sickening sound of metal folding in on itself. I remembered trying to move my arm and the seatbelt locking me in place. Then there was the paramedic asking who to call. My choice in that moment said more than I'd realized. I could have said Natalie. I didn't. I said Boyd. That wasn't just about the accident. That was about years of knowing who I could rely on and who I couldn't. And the truth was, Natalie had never been on the reliable list. A light knock on the door pulled me out of it. Denise, back for the night shift, peeked in. Need anything? I'm good, I said. She came in anyway, straightening the blanket and checking the IV line. You've got the look, she said. What look? The look of someone who's realizing a few things about the people in their life, she said, not unkindly. I didn't answer, but she wasn't wrong. Dinner was another forgettable tray lukewarm pasta, a dinner roll, and something that might have been pudding. I ate enough to take with my meds and pushed the rest aside. By the time the hall lights dimmed for the night, I was exhausted but not ready to sleep. My mind kept circling the same points. The accident, the inheritance, Natalie's sudden interest in helping with investments. The accident had taken me out of my plan to keep things low-key, but it hadn't changed the fact that I needed to protect what was mine. If anything, it made that even more urgent. I adjusted the bed to sit up a little, wincing at the pull in my shoulder. Outside the window, the streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Somewhere beyond them, the river ran past Aunt Evelyn's house, quiet for now. The thought crossed my mind that it wouldn't stay quiet for long. The next morning started with the smell of overly strong coffee drifting in from the nurse's station. Denise rolled in a vitals cart, humming something off-key. She checked my blood pressure and grinned. Looks like you're stabilizing nicely, which means you'll be getting more visitors. That was her way of warning me. I'd barely managed to swallow 2 bites of dry toast when the door opened. Natalie walked in first, wearing her usual sharp blazer like she was arriving at a board meeting. Right behind her was a tall man in a navy suit. My best guess was her attorney or some financial advisor she'd roped in. Well, you look functional, Natalie said, glancing at the sling. I'm alive, I said, not giving her more than that. She set a small bag of fruit on the bedside table without looking at me. We should talk about Aunt Evelyn's estate, she started, already flipping open a folder she'd brought. The man in the suit stepped forward. I'm Andrew. I help your sister manage her portfolio. She thought it might be smart to. I already have someone, I interrupted, keeping my tone even. And he's not you. Natalie's smile was tight. Colleen, this isn't about control. It's about making sure you don't make mistakes with something this significant. I leaned back against the pillow. The only mistake would be letting you anywhere near it. That landed harder than she expected. She recovered quickly, glancing at Andrew, who shifted uncomfortably. Before she could push back, Denise stepped in with a clipboard. Sorry, I need to check her 4-line. This'll take a few minutes. It was the kind of nurse move that wasn't just medical, it was tactical. Natalie knew when she'd been dismissed. She gathered her things, told me she'd be in touch, and left with Andrew in tow. Denise adjusted the drip and muttered, You need me to start screening your visitors? Wouldn't hurt, I said. The rest of the morning was blissfully uneventful. I managed to get a call into Mark, who confirmed he'd be at the hospital tomorrow with the trust paperwork. You're going to want to be sitting down for this, he said. I'll manage, I told him. Lunch came and went. The bland chicken and mashed potatoes weren't winning any awards, but they were better than breakfast. I was halfway through a mindless news segment on television when another knock came. This one was sharper, faster. A woman stepped inside, early 30s, dark hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a fitted black coat. She stopped short when she saw me. Her eyes widened, and she actually took a step back. "You're my CO," she blurted. It took me a second to place her. "Lieutenant Madison Clark," I said. "Harbor Logistics Team, right?" She nodded quickly, glancing toward the door. "I didn't know you were Natalie's sister." My grip on the bed rail tightened, and I didn't know she had you showing up here. Madison looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight. "I came with her. She didn't tell me we were visiting you specifically. Said she was checking in on family." Denise was at the door now, watching the exchange like a referee. Natalie appeared a moment later, clearly annoyed to find Madison already talking to me. "Madison, wait outside, please," she said. But Madison didn't move. She was looking at me now with the sharp, calculating look of someone fitting puzzle pieces together. "You've been the one signing the operational budget approvals," she said slowly. "Not the committee like she told us." Natalie's tone turned icy. "Madison?" "It's fine," I cut in, not looking at Natalie. "Yes, I run those approvals, and I run a lot more than that." That seemed to settle something for Madison. She gave me a curt nod, muttered, "Understood, ma'am," and stepped out past Natalie without another glance. Natalie lingered just long enough to say, "You're making things harder than they have to be." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After she left, Denise walked in, eyebrows raised. That was something. "Yeah," I said, staring at the closed door. "And it's not over." And 4. The rest of the day slid by in a mix of chart checks, a brief visit from Boyd bringing me a decent cup of coffee, and the occasional beep from my phone with messages I ignored. By evening, I was sore and tired, but not tired enough to stop thinking. Natalie's little stunt had just told me more than she realized. She was fishing for information, for allies, maybe even for a way to edge into my position at the company. But showing up with someone from my military circle? That was either desperate or sloppy. Possibly both. Denise dimmed the lights around 8, and I lay back, letting the low hum of the hospital fill the space. Out in the hallway, a cart rattled past, followed by the faint click of shoes on tile. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed too loud, then stopped abruptly. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to think about the timing of everything Aunt Evelyn's will, my sudden accident, Natalie's sudden proximity. None of it was coincidence. The next day started without warning. No gentle sunrise, no slow build. Mark showed up at 9 o'clock sharp, stepping into the room like a man who had already decided the outcome of the day. He was carrying a leather portfolio under his arm, the kind you only bring when there's something worth signing. "You able to sit up for this?" he asked, glancing at the sling. "I'm fine," I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "Just get to it." Mark set the folder on the tray table, flipped it open, and began outlining the trust terms in plain English. 80 million, full control upon signature. No oversight from Natalie or any other family members. This was airtight, your aunt made sure of it. The number was still unreal, even though I'd had days to process it. But hearing no oversight from Natalie was the real prize. I picked up the pen, paused for a second just to enjoy the weight of the moment, and signed. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was as final as any court ruling. Mark closed the folder. "Funds will transfer within 48 hours. My advice? Get your account secured today. New bank, separate from anything joint, and for God's sake, lock down your passwords." I smirked. "Already ahead of you. Haxers." Before we could get deeper into logistics, the door swung open. Natalie stepped in like she owned the place, this time without Madison. "Oh, perfect," she said, spotting Mark. "I was hoping to have a word about the estate." Mark didn't even turn toward her. "You're not listed on any of these documents. There's nothing for you to be involved in." Her smile went thin. "Colleen, don't you think that's a bit cold? We're family. We could nothing." I cut in. "You've made it clear we're not on the same team. You've been circling this thing like a vulture since the second you heard the amount. I'm done pretending you're here for my well-being." She straightened her shoulders, that fake calm slipping just enough to show the crack. "You're making enemies you don't need to make." I'm identifying them, I said. Mark slid the signed folder back into his case like he was locking away classified intel. This conversation is over. And Natalie left without another word. But I caught the flash of something in her eyes. Calculation. She wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. Once she was gone, Mark sat back down. You realize she's going to try to get at you through other means, right? People, influence, public perception. Hell, she might even dig into your service record if she thinks it'll help. I'd already considered that. Let her try. She won't find anything she can weaponize. And if she does, I've got a few things in reserve. Mark didn't press, but his expression said he knew I meant it. By early afternoon, I was discharged with a stack of papers, a bag of prescriptions, and Denise's parting words, "Don't let her near your front door." Boyd drove me home. The city was cold but clear, sunlight bouncing off the glass buildings and turning the Ashley River into a sheet of silver. My townhouse looked exactly the same from the outside, but stepping in felt different now, like the walls knew what had just shifted. I dropped my bag in the hall and went straight to my home office. New passwords, new accounts, new encryption on my devices. I even called a contact from my old unit who owed me a favor. He set up a secure server for sensitive files before the day was out. Natalie wasn't going to get within a mile of my finances. The first test came faster than I thought. Around 6, the phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Colleen, it's Mom." Her voice was warm but a little too sweet, like she was rehearsing friendliness. "Natalie told me you've been through a lot. She's worried about you." I could practically hear Natalie in the background feeding her lines. "I'm fine, Mom. She said something about you making rash decisions with the inheritance. Maybe you should let her help." I cut her off. "We're not having this conversation. My finances aren't a family project." There was a pause, the kind where someone's debating whether to keep pushing or hang up. She chose to push. "You've always been so independent. But this is a lot of money, Colleen. It could change all of our lives." "It's going to change mine," I said flatly. "Good night, Mom." I hung up before she could respond. Boyd, sitting at the kitchen counter, raised an eyebrow. "Family conference call?" "Family ambush," I corrected. We ordered takeout, ate in relative silence, and by the time I went upstairs to my bedroom, I'd already decided on my next move. The money wasn't just security, it was leverage, and I was going to use it, not hide from it. I started by pulling out a yellow legal pad and making 2 columns, defensive and offensive. Under defensive, I listed everything I needed to protect assets, company position, personal reputation. Under offensive, I started noting ways to tighten my grip on things Natalie wanted. Properties she had her eye on. Business connections she didn't even know I had. By the time I was done, the pad was nearly full. Some people treat an inheritance like a gift. I was treating it like ammunition. The first week back in my townhouse should have been quiet. The doctor had ordered rest, my shoulder made sure I followed through, and Boyd had promised to handle any surprise visits by relatives. But quiet doesn't mean peace. Silence can be its own kind of noise when you're waiting for someone like Natalie to make their next move. I kept my day's structured old military habit. Morning coffee, a slow walk around the block to keep from stiffening up, checking email from my civilian military consulting job, and calls with Mark to finalize legal details. He confirmed the transfer had gone through, the accounts were locked down, and the trust documents were recorded. From a legal standpoint, I was untouchable. From a personal standpoint, I was expecting Natalie to test that theory. 3 days passed without a single call or text from her. At first, I considered the possibility she'd given up. That was quickly replaced by the more realistic explanation. She was working on something she didn't want me to see until it was too late. Midweek, I stopped by the River House for the first time since the accident. The place was still empty, still spotless, and still felt like it was holding its breath. I walked the property line, checked the dock, and made a note to change the locks on the doors. Standing on the porch, I could picture exactly how Natalie would try to use this place, part trophy, part proof she belonged in Aunt Evelyn's will. She'd invite people here, play hostess, and claim it as part of our family home. I wasn't going to give her the chance. Back at the townhouse, Boyd was in the kitchen, finishing the last of the coffee. "Still radio silence?" he asked. "Too quiet," I said. She's either planning something or she's in trouble and doesn't want me to know. Both can be true, he replied, and he wasn't wrong. That afternoon, I got my first clue. A former colleague from an old logistics contract called to check in, but the questions didn't match the casual tone. He asked if I was aware of a new investment group in Charleston called Clear Harbor Ventures, said he'd been approached by them for a joint project, but the numbers didn't add up. The name meant nothing to me until he mentioned Natalie was at the meeting. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. This wasn't just a new hobby for her. She was building something, and odds were good she wanted my name or my money attached to it. I didn't tell him much, just advised him to steer clear if the paperwork didn't look solid. After we hung up, I made a few calls of my own. Contacts from my military and corporate circles. People who knew how to dig without leaving fingerprints. Within hours, I had enough to confirm my suspicion. Clear Harbor Ventures was Natalie's latest big idea, a real estate and logistics venture run out of a rented office with borrowed credibility. She'd recruited 3 small investors already, one of them a retired Navy commander I'd met at a conference years ago. That made it personal. I spent the next morning combing through public records, tracing shell LLCs, and taking notes. The pattern was classic Natalie: big promises, light details, and a willingness to let someone else clean up the mess when it went wrong. I wasn't going to wait for her to come knocking. I was going to make sure her next move hit a wall. But there was another layer to the silence. Mom hadn't called again, and that was unusual. Even when she was upset with me, she still checked in weekly. When I finally broke down and called her, she was short, distracted, and ended the conversation with, "I'm busy, honey. We'll talk later." I knew exactly whose influence that smelled like. That night, sitting in my home office, I thought back to the barbecue years ago, the one where Natalie had taken a shot at my career in front of the whole family. I remembered the way Mom had laughed along, maybe thinking it was harmless. It wasn't. It was a pattern. Natalie would push, I'd push back, and Mom would step in just enough to make it seem like I was overreacting. And every time, Natalie would walk away with more ground than she'd started with. This time, there wasn't going to be ground to take. I went to bed late, my shoulder aching from too much time at the computer. Lying there in the dark, I could almost hear Natalie's voice in my head, rehearsing the lines she'd use when she finally reached out again. Something about working together, maybe carrying on Aunt Evelyn's legacy, all of it just dressing on the same plan. Get close, get access, get paid. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, steady and calm, while my mind ran through scenarios. Natalie's silence wasn't her backing down. It was her winding up. I didn't have to wait long for Natalie to break her silence. 2 mornings later, I was in the middle of a call with a retired colonel about a supply chain audit when my front door buzzer went off. The voice on the intercom wasn't Natalie's. It was sharper, angrier. "Colleen, open the damn door." It was Mom. I let her in, mostly because I didn't want her yelling in the street. She came up the stairs fast for someone her age, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Behind her was Natalie, sunglasses hiding half her face but not the storm brewing underneath. "Do you want to tell me why my daughter's been cut out of everything?" Mom demanded before she was fully in the room. I stayed calm, because there was nothing for her to be in. That. Natalie took the sunglasses off, tossed them onto the counter, and went straight for the attack. "You signed the papers without even talking to me." "They weren't your papers to sign," I said. Her voice shot up an octave. "This isn't just about you. Aunt Evelyn wanted this family taken care of." "She wanted me taken care of," I cut in, keeping my tone flat. "That's why she left it to me." Natalie stepped forward, pointing a finger at me like she was issuing orders. "You've been gone for years, Colleen. Off in your military bubble while the rest of us lived in the real world. And now you waltz back in, grab everything, and think you're untouchable." I could see Mom shifting uncomfortably, but she didn't stop her. "Untouchable?" I said, standing now, ignoring the pull in my shoulder. "Number prepared?" "Absolutely. And that's what's eating you alive. You can't get to me this time." That's when she lost it. Natalie's voice cracked into a scream. "You think you're better than me. You always have. But you're nothing without the uniform, without someone telling you where to go and what to do. You wouldn't last a month in the real world." I didn't move. I let her yell, because nothing I said would land as hard as the fact that I wasn't reacting. Her breathing got heavier, her hands shook, and for the first time in years, I saw her without the mask, the one she wears when she's charming strangers or sweet-talking investors. Mom tried to step in then. "Girls, please." "This isn't your fight, Mom," I said without taking my eyes off Natalie. Natalie's expression shifted fast, like she'd realized she'd gone too far. She reached for her bag, muttered something about me regretting this, and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Mom stayed, looking at me like she wanted to say something but couldn't decide which side she was on. She settled for, "You should have handled that differently." "Alu." I didn't bother answering. After she left, I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, letting the cold glass steady me. I'd been in shouting matches before, in war zones, in training scenarios, in boardrooms, but something about watching Natalie's control snap felt different. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. She'd built her whole identity on being the one who could outmaneuver anyone, especially me. Now she knew she'd hit a wall she couldn't climb. And people like Natalie don't just walk away from that, they look for cracks. By mid-afternoon, Boyd had swung by. I told him about the blow-up, keeping my voice even. "She's going to retaliate," he said simply. "I know. What's your play?" "Let her make the first move," I said. "But make sure I'm ready when she does." We spent an hour reviewing some of the property and business intel I'd gathered on Clear Harbor Ventures. Boyd, who had spent enough time in logistics to spot a scam from a mile away, pointed out 3 weaknesses in her plan, 2 legal, 1 operational. "If she moves too fast, these will bury her," he said. "Good," I replied. The rest of the day was quieter, but the tension didn't leave. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be Natalie. When it wasn't, I almost wished it was better to face the next round than sit in the waiting. That evening, I made a point of taking a walk through the neighborhood. The air was cool, the kind that hinted at rain without delivering. I nodded to a few neighbors, kept my hands in my jacket pockets, and thought about how Natalie's outburst had shifted the balance. Before, she'd been working angles quietly, slipping through side doors trying to look respectable. Now she'd gone loud. That meant she was running out of quiet options. And when people like her run out of quiet options, they tend to make mistakes. The next morning, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the knock came. It wasn't Boyd's usual 2-tap knock or the lazy rap of a delivery driver. This one was steady, official. I opened the door to find Lieutenant Madison Clark standing there in civilian clothes, holding a manila envelope. Her eyes were sharp, but her tone stayed neutral. "Mind if I come in, ma'am?" I stepped aside. She walked in, taking in the townhouse like she was cataloging every detail. When we sat at the kitchen table, she set the envelope down but didn't slide it over right away. "I owe you an apology," she said. "The other day at the hospital, I shouldn't have shown up with your sister. I didn't know the full picture." "You figured it out, though," I said. Madison nodded once. "Natalie's been talking to people, not just business contacts, military ones. She's been asking questions about your record, about contracts you've handled, even about projects that aren't public." I kept my expression still. "And people answered?" "She's been dangling investment offers using Clear Harbor Ventures as the hook. Most of it is hot air, but she's persistent. She's also been telling people she's part of your circle. Some believe her." That was enough to make my jaw tighten. In my world, reputation is as valuable as any asset, and Natalie was trying to pickpocket mine. Madison finally pushed the envelope across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, social media posts, email excerpts, and notes from people who'd been approached. Some of it was sloppy, like she was rushing. But there were also signs of coordination. The same phrases used, the same half-truths repeated. One line caught my eye. "Colleen trusts me with her contacts. She just prefers to stay in the background." Madison tapped that sentence with her finger. "She's framing herself as your gatekeeper. If she keeps this up, she'll be in rooms you didn't even know she had access to." I flipped through more pages. There was even a photo of Natalie at a charity dinner last month, standing next to a retired general I'd met once at a Pentagon event. In the photo, she had her hand on his arm like they were old friends. I set the envelope aside. "Why bring this to me?" Madison leaned back. "Because I've seen what happens when someone like her gets inside a network they don't belong to. People get burned, reputations get trashed, and I don't like being used as an access point." She wasn't wrong. And now I had confirmation of what I'd suspected. Natalie wasn't just circling my finances. She was trying to graft herself onto my professional life. Anything else I should know? I asked. Madison hesitated, then said, "She's talking about the River House, telling people she might host some strategic events there, like it's hers to offer." That got a short, humorless laugh out of me. "She's welcome to try." We talked for another 10 minutes, mostly about who might already be compromised. When Madison left, I had more intel than I'd had in weeks, but I also knew the clock was ticking. I called Mark, filled him in, and told him to prepare a cease and desist letter for Natalie's little impersonation campaign. I also asked him to check the title and deed on the River House, just in case she'd gotten creative. By early afternoon, Boyd had come over, and we went through the envelope together. He picked up on a few details I'd missed patterns in the email timestamps, the order in which she was contacting people. "She's working off a list," he said. "My guess? She started with your old service connections and is moving outward." That made sense. Natalie's never been subtle about climbing ladders, and she's never cared whose rungs she stepped on. We decided on a two-pronged approach. Boyd would quietly reach out to people in my old unit and warn them off any opportunities Natalie pitched. Meanwhile, I'd shore up the civilian side former clients, consulting partners, anyone who might be swayed by a good sales pitch and a fake smile. The rest of the day was a blur of calls and emails. Most people were quick to shut it down once they knew the truth, but a few were more cagey, clearly weighing whether they could still get something out of her. Those were the ones I'd have to watch. By early evening, I'd worked through my list. My shoulder ached from too much time at the desk, so I stepped outside for air. The street was quiet except for the hum of a passing car. Across the way, a neighbor was bringing in groceries. I stood there for a moment, the cool air cutting through the stale feeling of the day. Natalie thought she was being clever, playing the long game. But now I knew exactly where she was aiming, and I wasn't about to let her get there. The next morning, I treated my townhouse like an ops center. Coffee in one hand, notebook in the other, I started mapping Natalie's network on the big whiteboard in my office. Every name Madison had given me went up there, along with anyone Boyd and I had flagged from past calls. Circles for confirmed contacts, squares for potential targets, red X's for people we'd already shut down. In the military, you don't just defend against threats, you predict their moves and get there first. This was no different. The only twist was that the enemy wasn't a foreign actor or a corporate competitor, it was my own sister. Boyd arrived mid-morning carrying 2 bagels and a USB drive. He set both on my desk. "Everything we could scrape without triggering alarms," he said. The drive was full of data public filings, corporate registrations, and a few open-source intelligence polls that most civilians wouldn't know how to find. We plugged it in and went through it together. Clear Harbor Ventures wasn't just Natalie's vanity project. She'd linked it to 2 other shell companies, both tied to out-of-state addresses. One was in Delaware, standard for tax purposes. The other was in Nevada, which meant she wanted more than tax benefits. Nevada's privacy laws make it hard to see who actually owns what. She was covering her tracks, but not perfectly. We spotted inconsistencies in signatures, mismatched mailing addresses, and one hilarious typo in a notarized document that could void it entirely. "Sloppy," Boyd muttered. "Sloppy is good," I said. "Sloppy leaves trails." From there, we divided the work. He'd cross-reference the investors' names with any military contracts or federal programs they'd been near. I'd focus on the civilian side, local politics, real estate boards, charity circuits. If Natalie was weaving herself into these circles, I wanted to know how far she'd gotten. By noon, we had enough to draw the first real picture of her operation. She was targeting people with reputations for being discreet and connected, the types who liked being in the room where decisions were made but didn't want their names in headlines. In other words, people who wouldn't run to the press if she scammed them. We also noticed something else. Her timing lined up with mine. She'd started approaching certain people right after my accident. That wasn't just opportunistic, it was calculated. She'd assumed I'd be too injured or distracted to respond. Boyd leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You think she had something to do with the crash?" I didn't answer right away. My gut said no. Natalie's a schemer, not a saboteur, but the overlap in timing was hard to ignore. Let's just say I'm not ruling anything out. In the afternoon, I called Madison. She picked up on the second ring. "Clark," she said. "Question," I began. "The night before my accident, Do you remember where Natalie was? There was a pause. I wasn't with her, but I know she had dinner with someone from Clear Harbor's investor list. Why? Just checking a timeline, I said, keeping my voice even. We wrapped the call quickly, but my mind kept circling the possibility that the crash had been more than bad luck. I didn't have proof, and I wasn't about to start tossing accusations without it. Still, it went up on the board. Accident timing? Coincidence? By early evening, the office whiteboard looked like a full-blown intelligence briefing. Lines connected names, arrows pointed to possible strategies, and Natalie's name sat in the center like a spider in its web. I stood back, arms crossed, scanning for any weak point I hadn't already marked. There it was, real estate licensing. One of her shell companies had filed an application for a property management license in South Carolina under a name I didn't recognize. That license was still pending, which meant there was an opportunity to challenge it. Boyd caught me smiling. Found something? Maybe. If I can get that application flagged before approval, it'll choke off one of her revenue streams before it starts. Need help? I'll handle it, I said. This one's better coming directly from me. You. That night, I drafted a formal objection to the licensing board. Nothing emotional. Just a clean, factual outline pointing to the inconsistencies we'd found: wrong addresses, mismatched names, missing disclosures. It was the kind of document they couldn't ignore without looking incompetent. When I hit send, I felt the same quiet satisfaction I'd get after a well-executed field op. No fireworks, no dramatic reveal, just a precise move that would land exactly where it needed to. Natalie wanted to play in my world. She was about to learn that in my world, precision beats noise every time. The license objection was barely 24 hours old when the next move came, and it wasn't subtle. Boyd called at 8 a.m. You might want to check the river house, he said. There's activity there. I didn't waste time. By the time I pulled up to the long gravel drive, there were 2 cars parked out front. One was Natalie's dark blue sedan. The other was a silver SUV with out-of-state plates. I parked off to the side and walked up the porch steps, noting that the front door was unlocked, a detail that irritated me more than it should have. Inside, voices echoed from the living room. Natalie was standing near the fireplace, gesturing at the wide windows in view of the river. Across from her were a man and woman in business attire, nodding politely like they were being shown a property listing. She saw me before I spoke. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she turned it back on full. Colleen, perfect timing, she said. I was just giving our guests a tour. Our guests? I asked. The man stepped forward. Daniel Moore, Moore and Sanderson Realty. We've been discussing possible event rentals for this location. I kept my tone even. This property is not available for rent. Natalie's eyes narrowed just enough for me to catch it. We're just exploring possibilities, she said lightly. I walked past her, straight to the sideboard, where Aunt Evelyn's original property documents were stored. Daniel, is it? Here's a possibility you leave now, before I call the sheriff and report trespassing. The woman glanced at Daniel, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we should... She didn't finish the sentence. They both left without another word. When the door closed, Natalie dropped the pretense. You're overreacting. 1. You're in my house without permission, trying to pitch it like you own it, I said. That's not overreacting, that's enforcing boundaries. She folded her arms. You're going to regret shutting me out like this. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. No, Natalie. You're the one who's going to regret thinking you could walk in here and make deals on something that isn't yours. For a moment, we just stood there, both too stubborn to look away first. She finally grabbed her bag from the couch and left, slamming the door behind her. The house felt heavier once she was gone. I did a quick check of every room, making sure nothing had been disturbed. Everything was in place, but it didn't matter, the intrusion was enough. I locked the door, then the gate at the end of the drive, and made a mental note to have a security system installed before the week was over. Back in my truck, I called Boyd. She just tried to pitch the river house for events. He swore under his breath. Want me to run interference with local realtors? Do it, I said, and make sure they know anyone taking her seriously is risking more than wasted time. By the time I got back to the townhouse, Mark had already seen my missed call and was ringing me back. I told him about the encounter, and he promised to draft a formal letter barring Natalie from entering the River House property. This will be legally binding, he said. If she steps foot there again, it's trespassing. That's exactly what I want, I replied. The rest of the day was a mix of tightening defenses and following up on our earlier investigation. Boyd confirmed he'd spoken to 3 real estate offices. None of them would touch a listing tied to Clear Harbor Ventures now. That was one less avenue for her to exploit. In the evening, I drove back to the River House, this time alone, and walked the property again. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the dock. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own footsteps too clearly. I stood at the water's edge, looking at the reflection of the trees rippling in the current. This house wasn't just part of an inheritance, it was a piece of Aunt Evelyn's life, a place that had always been steady when the rest of the family wasn't poussant. I wasn't going to let it become one of Natalie's bargaining chips. On the drive home, I realized something important. Natalie's moves were getting bolder. That meant she was either desperate, confident, or both. And either way, it meant she was willing to risk crossing lines she couldn't uncross. Mark didn't waste any time. By 9 a.m. the next morning, he was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, sliding 2 documents into place. One was the cease and desist letter we'd talked about for Natalie's impersonation campaign. The other was a formal no trespass order for the River House. I've already sent digital copies to the sheriff's office and the county clerk, he said, tapping the stack. This is just for your records. If she steps foot on the property again, you can have her removed. And if she continues to represent herself as affiliated with your professional work, we can escalate to a civil suit. I read through both documents carefully, checking for loopholes. They were clean, tight language, no wiggle room. Send the hard copies to her address, I said. Mark smiled faintly. Certified mail. She'll have to sign for them herself. We went over a few more legal guardrails, asset protection clauses, emergency injunctions, and contingencies if she tried to challenge the will. Mark was thorough, but I knew Natalie's talent for slipping through cracks meant we had to think 2 steps ahead. As soon as he left, I called Boyd to coordinate the next layer. He'd been quietly speaking with some of our mutual contacts to make sure Natalie's networking options were shrinking. Today, he had news. She's been reaching out to a small group of venture investors in Charleston, he said. Same pitch, exclusive access, strategic events at the River House. None of them bid after I explained the situation. Keep the pressure on, I told him. I want her to run out of rooms to work in. And from Spode. After lunch, I called Madison. She was blunt as ever. If she keeps pressing military contacts, I'll make a formal report through internal channels. It'll freeze her out of anything tied to defense contracting. That would cut her off from one of her main plays, I said. That's the idea. In the afternoon, I took the fight into my own hands. Using the information Boyd and Madison had helped gather, I drafted a brief for the state licensing board that not only objected to Natalie's pending property management license, but also detailed the pattern of misrepresentation she'd been engaged in. I included copies of the emails where she claimed to be acting on my behalf. The language was straightforward. The applicant has demonstrated a consistent pattern of misrepresentation and has attempted to secure business using assets she does not own. It wasn't personal, it was professional and undeniable. By late afternoon, I got confirmation from the board that they'd received the filing and would review it within the week. It wasn't a guaranteed win, but it planted a flag in a place Natalie couldn't ignore. That evening, Boyd stopped by with takeout and 2 beers. We ate at the counter, going over the current map of her network. There were fewer connections now, but the ones she still had were loyal enough to be a problem. She's not going to take this lying down, he said between bites. I'm counting on it, I replied. The more she reacts, the more mistakes she makes. After dinner, I went upstairs to my office. I stood in front of the whiteboard, studying the lines and names like it was a battle map. Every arrow I'd drawn represented a move Natalie had made. Every red X marked one I'd shut down. But there was something else I noticed now, the pattern of her approaches. She wasn't just picking people at random. She was trying to build influence in 3 specific areas: local real estate, logistics, and military-adjacent consulting. If she'd managed to get a foothold in all 3, she could have spun a narrative that made her look like a legitimate partner for high-level projects. That plan was gone now. Piece by piece, I dismantled it before it could solidify. I erased 2 names from the board contacts Boyd had confirmed were no longer speaking to her, and drew a line under the rest. My shoulder still ached from the accident, but the satisfaction of seeing her network shrink made it easier to ignore. Before I shut down for the night, I checked my email one last time. There, it was a read receipt from the certified letters Mark had sent. Natalie had signed for them that afternoon. No response yet, but I knew her well enough to know that silence wasn't surrender. It was the pause before she decided which line she wanted to cross next. The message came on a Thursday afternoon, 2 days after Natalie signed for the legal papers. It wasn't a call or an email, it was a group text, sent to me, Mom, and Boyd. The subject line said nothing, just a single attachment, a scanned letter from Natalie addressed to the family. I opened it and read every word. She'd written 4 paragraphs painting herself as the victim of a coordinated effort to undermine her and accusing me of manipulating Aunt Evelyn's will. She called Boyd my enforcer, accused Mark of predatory legal tactics, and even suggested I was mentally unfit to manage the inheritance. It was pure theater, carefully crafted to put me on the defensive and make Mom doubt me. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom's voice was sharp. "Colleen, what is this? She says you've been freezing her out on purpose." I kept my tone even. "Everything in that letter is false. You've known me long enough to recognize that." There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear her exhale. "You and Natalie have always been competitive, but this feels different, meaner." "Because it is," I said, "and I'm done playing it as a family squabble. She's targeting my career, my assets, and my reputation. That's not sisterly rivalry, it's a calculated attack." Mom didn't respond to that directly. Instead, she muttered something about needing time to think, and hung up. Boyd came over within the hour. He tossed his phone onto the counter. "You're not the only one who got the letter. She sent it to half the extended family and a few of her business contacts. She's trying to rally people." "Let her," I said. "The more public she makes this, the more proof I have of her intent." Mark agreed. When I forwarded him the letter, he called back within 10 minutes. "This is defamation. It's actionable. If you want, we can file tomorrow." Part of me wanted to, but I also knew Natalie's ego would push her into a bigger misstep if I let her run with this a little longer. "Hold off," I told him. "For now." That night, I drove out to the river house, not because I thought she'd be there, but because I needed the quiet. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that comes before the real cold sets in. I walked the length of the dock, hands in my jacket pockets, thinking about the years of friction that had led to this moment. It wasn't one fight, one disagreement, or even the inheritance itself. It was years of her resenting that I'd built something on my own, outside the family's influence. The military gave me a career, discipline, and connections she couldn't touch. And for Natalie, untouchable has always been a challenge, not a fact. Back at the house, I noticed something odd. A folded sheet of paper tucked between the storm door and the main door. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a printout of a photo me, from years ago, in uniform, speaking at a conference. Across the bottom, written in marker, were the words, "Not who she says she is." No signature, no explanation, just the message. I stood there for a full minute, reading it again. It wasn't Natalie's handwriting, but it didn't need to be. Someone in her orbit had done this for her. It was a cheap attempt at intimidation. I put the paper in my bag, locked the house, and drove straight back to the townhouse. Boyd was still there, and when I showed him, his jaw tightened. "She's escalating," he said. "She's getting reckless." I corrected. We spent the next hour cataloging everything: letters, photos, screenshots, the incident at the river house, the impersonation. By the end, we had a timeline that left no doubt about her intent. "This is enough for a restraining order," Boyd said. "It's enough for a lot of things," I replied. The break between us wasn't just personal now. It was documented, legal, and irreversible. I wasn't thinking about reconciliation or keeping the peace. I was thinking about containment and neutralization. Family or not, Natalie had crossed into territory where the only thing that mattered was making sure she couldn't do any more damage, and I was ready to make that happen. The morning after we compiled the timeline, I woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't on Natalie's next move. They were on mine. I started with a list of priorities: personal, professional, and legal. The legal side was straightforward. Keep the current protections in place, follow through on the licensing board complaint, and prepare documentation in case a restraining order became necessary. The professional side was more proactive. Reconnect with my military consulting network, close any gaps Natalie had tried to slip through, and take on 2 new contracts that had been sitting on my desk. The personal list was harder. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I hadn't given myself room to think about it. The accident, the inheritance, and the family war had filled every available inch of mental space. Boyd arrived mid-morning, carrying 2 coffees and a small box from the local bakery. "Peace offering," he said, setting the box down. "For what?" I asked. "For telling you yesterday that this was enough for a restraining order. I know you weren't ready to hear it." End quote. I smirked. "You're not wrong, but you were right." We ate in relative silence, going over the latest updates. He'd heard from Madison Natalie's name had started to get quietly blacklisted in certain defense-adjacent circles. That alone would cut her reach in half. By noon, I was on the phone with a potential client, a logistics firm in Virginia that wanted help streamlining its supply chain for military contracts. It was exactly the kind of work I was good at, the kind that reminded me why I'd built this second career in the first place. We set up a meeting for the following week. The afternoon was for the River House. I drove out there with a local security company's rep, walking him through the property. We settled on a system with cameras, motion sensors, and remote alerts. It would be installed within the week. Standing on the porch with the contract in hand, I realized how much the house had shifted in my mind. It wasn't just a piece of Aunt Evelyn's estate anymore. It was an anchor point, a place that grounded me in the middle of everything else. Back in town, I stopped at the post office to send a small package to a former colleague. Inside was a thank you note and a copy of one of the public records we'd uncovered on Clear Harbor Ventures. The note was simple. "Thought you'd want to see this before making any commitments." It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the people in my circle. That evening, Boyd and I met Madison for dinner at a quiet place near the harbor. We talked shop for the first half hour, but eventually the conversation shifted to lighter things: travel plans, good restaurants, the small absurdities of civilian life after years in uniform. When Madison excused herself to take a call, Boyd leaned back in his chair. "Feels different tonight," he said. "How so?" "You're not watching the door every 5 minutes." I thought about that. He was right. The edge I'd been carrying since the hospital was still there, but it wasn't running the whole show anymore. Back at home, I reviewed my lists again. The legal pieces were moving, the professional side was rebuilding, and the personal, well, that was a work in progress. I closed the notebook, turned off the desk lamp, and sat in the dark for a moment. Rebuilding wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about making sure the ground I was standing on was solid, so when the next storm came, and it always comes, I'd be ready. And this time, I wouldn't be rebuilding alone. The week started with rain steady, gray, and unhurried. I sat at my desk with the blinds half open, the sound of water on the windows tapping in time with my thoughts. My calendar was full again. Client calls, follow-ups, and one final meeting with Mark to close the loop on every legal measure we'd set in motion. Mark arrived right on time, a leather portfolio under his arm. He flipped it open and laid out the paperwork in neat rows. "The licensing board formally denied Natalie's application," he said. The objection stood. They cited misrepresentation and incomplete disclosure. I scanned the letter, taking in the official seal at the top. It was more than a bureaucratic win. It was a public record that undercut her credibility. "Also," Mark continued, "the cease and desist has been acknowledged. There's been no further public use of your name or credentials." That was the first time in months I'd heard a complete sentence about Natalie that didn't require an immediate countermeasure. "Good," I said. "Let's keep it that way." He nodded, closed the portfolio, and stood. "You've done what most people can't. You've taken control of a messy family situation without letting it consume your life." After he left, I walked to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and leaned on the counter. It wasn't that the situation hadn't consumed parts of my life it had, but it hadn't swallowed me whole. That was the difference. By midday, Boyd stopped by with an envelope from the sheriff's office. Inside was confirmation that the no trespass order had been logged in their system. If she sets foot on the River House property, she'll be escorted out, he said. I set the paper aside. Feels like every wall we needed is finally in place. Walls are good, Boyd said. But you've also got doors you can open when you choose. Later in the afternoon, I drove out to the River House one more time. The new security system was in, discreet but thorough. Cameras angled toward the driveway and dock, sensors in place at every entry point. It was the kind of setup that would give me peace of mind whether I was in town or halfway across the country. I walked through each room slowly, the scent of fresh paint still faint in the air from some touch-ups I'd ordered. In the living room, the wide windows looked out over the river, the current moving steadily, unconcerned with human drama. For a moment, I thought about Aunt Evelyn. She'd never said much about family disputes, but she had a way of making her feelings known without a single lecture. Leaving this house to me had been her way of speaking. I understood it now more than ever. Before leaving, I locked the front door and stood for a moment on the porch, watching the water. The fight with Natalie wasn't just about property or money. It had been about control, identity, and who got to decide the terms of their own life. Back at the townhouse, I filed the day's papers in a clean folder labeled Closed Actions. The label was deliberate. Not ongoing, not pending, closed. That evening, Madison called. Word is, your sister's been quiet. No new pitches, no new contacts. My guess is she's recalibrating or she's out of moves. Either way, I said, she's not my problem anymore. Boyd joined me later for dinner, and we talked about everything but Natalie. It wasn't forced. It was natural, like the air in the room had shifted. When he left, I stood at the window for a while, looking out at the quiet street. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement dark and reflective under the streetlights. This chapter wasn't about winning or losing, it was about standing my ground when it counted and knowing I'd done it without compromising who I was. The military had taught me tactics, discipline, and how to read a battlefield. Life had taught me when to walk away with my head high. I'd never know for sure if the white truck was a coincidence or something more, but it no longer mattered. The real battle wasn't the one that put me in the hospital, but the one that came after. And now, finally, both lessons sat side by side. The ground under me felt solid again, and I intended to keep it that way. Looking back, it's strange how quickly a family dispute can turn into something that feels like a full-scale operation. I'd faced pressure before deployments, high-stakes contracts, negotiations where one wrong word could cost millions, but nothing prepares you for when the battlefield is your own blood. Natalie didn't lose because I outsmarted her. She lost because I refused to play the game on her terms. Every step I took was deliberate, every boundary backed by action. And in the end, the win wasn't just in keeping the River House or protecting my career, it was in knowing I could hold my ground without becoming like her. The inheritance didn't change me. The fight didn't break me. If anything, both reminded me of something the military had drilled into me years ago. You can't control every threat, but you can control your response. And that, more than anything, is what let me walk away from all of this with the one thing she could never take: peace.